does. It does. I mean, seriously, it's very important to wrap yourselves up.
On July 14th.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get started. So hello, hello everybody. And here's Anne. All right. Here's Anne, and so Connie, you're on the screen, and Florence is here, but we can't see her. And Joe Steinberg is also here, which is great.
Oh, it's nice.
Yeah, Joe is on the telephone.
Okay.
Over in Roslindale, which is very exciting. So welcome to everybody. Thanks.
I do. I've got my jacket.
Thanks everybody, and for being here. So we are. It's sort of I don't know if we're at the midpoint. We're somewhere in the middle of this story from the Talmud, from tractate Berakhot, which has to do with blessings, right? And so, which obviously the story is not just about blessings, but it sort of gives the basis for the story, right? Is an argument about the nature of the evening prayer, right? Is the evening prayer something that is obligatory, or is it something that's optional, right? It's also a story about the limits of shall we say, communal, what's the word I'm looking for? Communal uniformity, right? Does everybody, who is in this community, do they have to agree that the evening prayer is obligatory, or can we handle some amount of disagreement, right? Some people think it's one and other people think it's other, right? And we all know about this in our real lives, right? We all know people who are, quote unquote, more religious than we are, and we all know people who are less religious than we are, right? And I had a colleague in rabbinical school once who said, that everyone who's more religious than me is a fanatic, and everyone who's less religious than me is an apikoros, right? An apikoros is a sort of a what's the word? It's a heretic, right? A heretic, right?
Is that a Jewish word?
Apikoros is a Greek word, like epicure, but it's a Jewish word for like a heretic, for someone who believes in Greek philosophy rather than in God, right? So, yeah. So how much communal sort of wiggle room do we have, right? And just to be clear about this, right? It's not about actual practice, right? Because there's probably plenty of people at that time, just like there are plenty of people today, who don't pray the evening prayer, whether they think it's obligatory or they think it's not obligatory, right? It's about what the attitude is about it, right? I mean, I know plenty of Jews. There's a fairly common attitude among many of the Jews from the former Soviet Union, right? That they don't follow the rules, but they do want someone who's going to do something, say like a Passover Seder or a funeral. They want all the rules to be followed, right? And you probably know a lot of other Jews that are like this as well, right? So, which is just not an uncommon thing. All right, so let's pick up. So where we left off, right? Where we left off was that the two protagonists of this story, right? One of them is Rabban Gamliel, right? The Nasi, the head of the rabbinic community, right? The other one is Rabbi Yehoshua, right? Rabbi Yehoshua was a much more humble kind of a guy, right? And we found that the folks, all the sort of the community of rabbis got very upset with Rabban Gamliel and the way he was treating Rabbi Yehoshua in a very disrespectful way, and they decided to depose him, right, and to make someone else the head of the academy for at least temporarily, right? And so we were reading, right, about at this point, right, about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right, who it turns out was 17 years old, right, a little young to be the boss, right? And what does he go? He didn't have a beard, right? He has, he has. I mean, I don't have any hair, but he had no gray hair. And so he goes home to his wife, right, to his house. He goes to his household, and she is very. I think we saw last week that she's very realistic about this, right? Is this really a good idea for you, right? Because probably they're going to depose you as soon as you end up be the boss be king for a day, right? And then they'll get rid of you, right? But he is undeterred. He thinks it's the best thing that could ever happen. A guy who maybe it would be unlikely ever to be the head of the Rabbinical Academy. His attitude, well, if I get to do it for a day, phenomenal. You guys are okay. I don't need the peanut gallery today.
Somebody should take a picture. They are hanging on your every word.
They are. Well, I think part of the problem is they're hanging on the leash. So I'm going to take them off the leash, and then I'm going to. They're going to.
The door's open?
Uh-oh.
They are the most astute people.
They're going to wander. Get out here. Come on. Pop here. Come.
Yes.
They're also probably crazy.
All right. They're going to wander around a little bit, and then they will settle down. Okay. All right. So let's go to the text. We will see what is going on with these guys. Okay. All right. So he went and consulted with his wife. All right. Is that visible to people? Okay. Does it need to be bigger?
No, it's all true.
Okay. All right. All right. There's room for concern, she says to him. Perhaps they... Oh, God. This is the problem with doing it this way. I apologize ahead of time. Okay. This. Okay.
You told us once, but I forgot. Why are some things bolded and others not?
Yes, very important point. So, as you notice, all of the Hebrew or Aramaic is bolded. Only part of the English is bolded. That is because the bolded part is the literal translation, and the other part is kind of a commentary. Okay, so don't take completely literally anything that is in regular script, right? I mean, you shouldn't probably even take completely literally the bold, which is a direct translation, right? Because it's a translation. Right, it's going to be an interpretation because it's a translation, right? But certainly the explanatory stuff is also interpretation. Perhaps they will remove you from office, just as they removed Rabban Gamliel, right? He said to her, based on the folks saying, let a person use an expensive goblet one day and let it break tomorrow, right? If someone gives you a beautiful bottle of wine, right? You don't not drink the bottle of wine because you'll never be able to afford one like it ever again, right? You enjoy it for what you enjoy what you've got, take advantage of it, and then okay, move on with the rest of your life, right? She said to him, "You have no white hair. It is inappropriate for one so young to head the sages." So he was 8. I'm sorry, I said before he was 17. That was wrong. He was 18 years old. But there was a miracle, and 18 rows of hair turned white. Right? So he was this beautiful young man, right? And 18 rows turned white, right? So that explains that which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, I am as one who is 70 years old. He did not actually say, I am 70 years old, right? I'm like one. I believe, I don't know for a fact, but I believe that comes from the Talmud, right? That I'm like one who was 70 years old, and I never knew X or Y or Z. Of course, right off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what it was that he's... go ahead, Connie, do you remember?
Oh, I had a question.
Yeah.
If he's 18, she must be the same age or younger. So she's pretty wise, isn't she, for a young woman?
I think that's true. I think that's true. And I don't know, actually, if I don't know her age, right? And I don't mean that, like that her age is necessarily knowable from the text. What I mean is that I'm pretty sure that the tradition has an opinion about how old Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's wife was. Maybe she is actually an older person, right? And married to a young man, because it is always good, right? Rabbis should always have spouses who are very wise. It helps. So it might just be that, or it could be, right, that we all know that women mature more quickly than men, especially in their verbal capacities, right? So it could just be that she's ahead of him in this regard. But I don't know. But thank you, Connie. That's a very good point. All right. It was taught on that day that they removed Rabban Gamliel from his position and appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in his place. There was also a fundamental change in the general approach of the study hall. All right, so this is very interesting, right? So this again moves that question, right, about communal norms, right? Who is appropriate to study Torah? Who is appropriate to become a rabbi, right? Is it anybody or just a select few, right? So we're beginning to get a sense of that, any idea that you might have, right, that Judaism in its inception was a monolithic thing, right? Let it be relatively clear that the Talmud, at least, remembers that it was not a question. It was not monolithic, right? That there were differences of opinion about so many topics, including who is supposed to be the vessel of the tradition, who's supposed to be the one, who are the ones who are allowed to be the carriers of the tradition, right? So one thing that they did, they dismissed the guard at the door. Now, why would there be a guard at the door of the yeshiva?
To keep out people that Gamaliel did not want to come in.
Exactly. So in case you didn't hear what Naomi said, right, that to keep out the riffraff, right, to keep out students that Rabban Gamliel thought were not worthy of learning Torah. So permission was granted to the students to enter. So, and here again, there's gloss here, so we'll just use the gloss, we might as well, right? Instead of Rabban Gamliel's selective approach that asserted that students must be screened, let's see here. Oh, it's Maury's, okay. Okay, instead of a selective approach that asserted that the students must be screened before they would be accepted into the study hall, the new approach asserted that anyone who seeks to study should be given the opportunity to do so. As Rabban Gamliel would proclaim and say, any student who's inside, right, his thoughts and his feelings are not like his outside, his conduct and his character traits, although there are people who say that this also refers to, what do you think?
People who disagree with him.
That's interesting. It might be that, right? Any other ideas? She said people who disagree with Rabban Gamliel, right? That they need to at least from an external position agree with. I hesitate about that one, right? Because what we learned last week, right, is that Rabban Gamliel was very eager to have a big argument with Rabbi Yehoshua about this question of the obligatory versus the optional. And Rabbi Yehoshua just kept on, kept on backing off, right? He didn't want to have that conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
The way I read it is that a student who dissimulates.
Okay, so a student who's kind of a pretender or a liar, right? Okay, right. So that might fall into conduct and character traits, right? But I also think that for Rabban Gamliel, right, and we already saw this when in the piece that was talking about whom should we appoint as Rabban Gamliel's successor, right? And this is not lost. It should not be lost on you, right? That Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is a beautiful young man, and Rabbi Yehoshua is famous for being the ugliest rabbi there ever was, right? And so, lest you think that it was only the Greeks who cared about physical beauty, right? That's just not true, right? That there was a value in Judaism as well placed on physical beauty, right? Now it might be a different standard of beauty than what we would have today. For instance, one of the most beautiful things a man could have is a beard, right? The more majestic the beard, the better looking the man, right? And I can tell you, as a man who has a beard, not all people like beards on men, right? So,
But then the gloss, that is,
yes,
his conduct and character traits are lacking. Nothing to do with beauty.
of course, because why might the gloss want to overlook that? Superficial, right? God forbid that the rabbis are superficial, right? But that would suggest, of course, that physical beauty is something that's superficial, right? Whereas I think an obsession with beauty, right, probably is superficial, right? On the other hand, right, there is a real emphasis in Judaism on what we call hidur mitzvah, right, which is making things beautiful, right, making the commandments a beautiful experience, right. So whatever whatever the raw material of your physical appearance, right, you should keep your body as clean as possible, right. You should be dressed properly, you should be adorned properly, so on and so forth, right. So it doesn't necessarily need to be superficial, right, an emphasis on beauty. But I think you're right. I think, and also, right, that current Orthodox Jewish commentators very often are very interested in making sure that there's a big distinction, right, between, sort of the Greek world with this emphasis on the body, right, and the Jewish world, right, with the emphasis on other matters, right, character and conduct and so on and so forth, right. But outward appearance does matter, right? And as I said, I don't think it's just about superficial. This one's pretty and this one's not, or this one has a beard and this one doesn't have a beard, right? But we'll see as the story develops that appearances are very important in a different way. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, the psychology field, somebody has mentioned.
Rabbi Joe Steinberg.
Oh, hi, Joe. Give me 1 second. Maury is speaking, and then we'll come to Jeannie, and then we'll come to you.
All right.
In changing your identity when you have to put a beard on your face, or irrespective of what's generally required of Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, right. So and so the beard, right? The business about the beard, right? It has to do with the notion in the Torah that you're not supposed to shave your face, right? So it is a commandment, and so, but obviously it's not a commandment for a person who doesn't have a beard to pretend that he has one, right? I mean, there are people who can't grow beards, right? My son complains all the time that his beard doesn't grow in this little clefty part that we both have. And I said, well, that's just the way your face looks, It doesn't mean that your beard is any less appealing. It just means that you don't have right there. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Was David described as?
Yes, David was defined as beautiful. Yes. Right. And again, that was a different period. So did the beauty at that point require a beard? I'm not sure.
He was sort of a little bit feminine.
Right. In the early parts of his life, he was presented as being quite. I don't remember off the top of my head if he explicitly described as being without a beard, but yes, there was a sort of a feminine aspect to him.
The beard is sort of masculine. and
Generally, yes.
emphasis on
Right.
being fruitful and
But it's also the word. One of the words for beard in Hebrew is zaken, right, which means old. So so there's a distinction between youth and maturity, let's say. Go ahead, Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll just be on for a second, then I'll mute. Talking about beauty, how about the beauty of one's mind, the beauty of one's soul? That to me is beauty.
Right.
How do our ancestors feel about that?
Yes. Well, I think that's one of the things that is, I think, most important, right, about this argument that I have with the gloss here, right? Because if we say that inside is thoughts and feelings and outside is conduct and character traits, right? That's suggesting that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah doesn't care about conduct and character, right? He only cares about thoughts and feelings, right? Whereas I would be more inclined, right, to say that internal, right, has to be, and again, we could argue about this, right, but that the internal has to do with thoughts, feelings, character, conduct, so on and so forth, right, and the outside has to do with the sort of the physical characteristics, what a person looks like, how he's dressed, how he carries himself, stuff like this, right? And so, what from that perspective, right?
And both make the full mensch.
Right, exactly. We could agree with Rabban Gamliel, right? That we do need both, right? The internal and the external, right? But we could also say, right, that with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right, that if we have a strong internal, right, if we have a good character, right, if we have honest thoughts, right, and are in touch with our feelings, right, that we can develop the outside, right? That's one of the reasons that we come to Torah, right? That because we study Torah in order to improve either our inside or our outside. We don't need to have both completely ready, right? And so that's why I'm sort of pushing on this a little bit. But I do think it's really interesting, right? From a Jewish perspective, which Jew today is expected to study Torah? Everybody, right? So in a sense, everybody gets to go to yeshiva, right? It shouldn't matter, do you have the right parents, right? It shouldn't matter, do you have the right clothes? You know, you dress up in, I don't know, whatever the trendy clothes are. You know, you have the right toga or whatever it is, right? That shouldn't matter, right? What should really matter is Torah going to have a positive effect on your life, and are you going to be able to bring Torah to other people? All right. So Rabban Gamliel was very strict. He did not want to let everybody in. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, anyone who wants to come and learn, come and learn. Okay. All right. The Gemara relates on that day, and I love this. Right. Remember, this all happens on a single day. Right. In that sort of mythological way that the Talmud works. Right. When there's these big banner days, it's a red letter day, and everything happens on that day. Right. It's like the story in the book of Joshua, right, where they're having a big fight, right, and God delays the setting of the sun, so the Israelites can finish the battle, right? It's sort of like that. It's one really long day, right? So the Gemara relates on that day, several benches were added to the study hall, to accommodate the numerous students. There's such thirst among the early Jews to study Torah, right? And we have to add benches to the study hall, right? Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yosef ben Dostai and the rabbis disputed this matter. One said that 400 benches were added to the study hall, and one said 700 benches were added to the study hall. Just mind you, right, that the size of this study hall, right, it was the same as this Fleet Center, right? It's not the Fleet Center anymore. It's the TD Garden, right? It's the same as a hockey stadium, right? A hockey arena, right? Because because the rabbinic in the rabbinic world, right? There was such an advanced technology of building that we could build rooms that were big enough to hold 7,000 benches.
But no microphones.
No, because you have people.
But acoustics. But how could they hear?
Good acoustics. No, I'm joking, of course, right? Clearly these stories are, with hyperbole and, which is, I think, is so fascinating, right? Because obviously in certain circles people would read these literally. But I actually think that, right, we're not necessarily supposed to take these as literal stories, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that. Right, which is not to say that none of these people ever existed, right? But just that we don't want to take it completely literally. All right.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is this anything to do with Hillel? Point of time or point of thinking?
This is a little later than Hillel.
So it's a little later than Hillel, and he said then, and blah, 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 and then go and study.
Yeah.
So was he anticipating this, or was that precluded?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, the historical record, like actual historiography, as far as I understand it, right, suggests that none of these study halls actually existed, right? That this is all sort of a retrojection of later reality onto this period, right? So certainly, if there were no actual study halls now, in this period, then there were no actual study halls in the period of Hillel and Shammai. But that does not mean, right, that Torah study was impossible, right? It's just that people would study in small groups, right? Yeah.
Are they just trying to tell us that everybody argues even over the smallest points?
In a sense, but I would change it a little bit, right? I would say that that when it comes to these halachic discussions, right, there are, in a sense, no minor points, right? That all of the points are really crucially important.
Well, they're not making that.
And the challenge, right, of course, for us is, and especially as regards the 400 versus the 700, what? Like, how? So the best I can do, and maybe someone here can do better, right? The best I can do about the 400 versus the 700, right, is to sort of make the point, right, that there was so much pent up demand for Torah study. So many people wanted access to Torah, and a position along the lines of the one held by Rabban Gamliel, right, that our job, right, and this is not an insignificant question for today, right? If the job of the rabbis is to keep out anybody who's not completely appropriate, right, then we are going to end up with a situation that Rabban Gamliel is worried about in a minute, right? Which is that, oh my God, we are keeping Torah from the Jews, right? We are actually doing, right? But there is the other side of it, right? That if you open it up too much, right, that could lead to mixed dancing, right? That it could lead to people having wrong opinions, right? Like thinking that it's okay to say that the evening prayer is optional. And maybe the question about is it 400 or was it 700, right? Is to raise up the question that, well, how many people actually wanted in? Is that a question we can even answer? Right? What was the demand, and what was the and how did we meet that demand, and could we even meet that demand? All right. So when he saw the tremendous growth in the number of students, Rabban Gamaliel was disheartened. Let's see here. Habakah halsha date, right? So his mind got weak, literally, right? He sort of was struck, right, with this sense of dread, right? Perhaps, heaven forbid, right, I prevented Israel from engaging in Torah study. Now we have so and I think, right, yes, not perhaps, right, and that's one of the reasons why we're arguing about 400 versus 700, right? The actual numbers maybe don't matter, right, but 400 benches, say 2 people to a bench, that's a lot of people, right? A lot of people, and so yeah, he probably did, right? And they show this is the mysterious they. Who shows you your dreams? Angels, God, your own psyche, right? Who knows, right? I'm sorry?
Your students even.
Maybe your students are sending you dreams. All right, so they showed him in his dream white jugs filled with ashes, right, alluding to the fact that the additional students were worthless idlers. Right, so he has a dream, right, makes himself feel better, right? He has a dream that makes him feel better. All these new students, useless, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm reminded, and you gotta give me latitude, I'm reminded of the fight that they had, the 15,000 students that died,
Yeah.
blah, 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 it wasn't, in reference to your comments, was it because it was too much for them to handle? And in what ways? I'm not going to comment on something that I don't understand.
Right.
Follow what
I do. So I think you're talking about the Bar Kokhba revolt. Is that?
No, not the Berakhot
No.
revolt, but the students that died because they disputed one another, and it was during the period of time, I believe, when there was the bad lesson of bad discussion about gossip.
Oh, Lashon Hara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When there were students, was it that time when we lost 15,000?
I don't remember that in particular.
Go to the one that you want. But
Yeah,
if you have
the-
15,000 students supposedly, and I don't mean to preempt this, but
Yeah.
there was times when there was huge numbers of students that died.
Yeah. I mean, but again, the question always is, as with any ancient text, right? When do we take it? When do we take those numbers literally, right? Versus when do we take those numbers as indicative of some important point?
Well,
Right.
the point being not the number of students, but the number of serious questions that arise out of the main one.
Exactly. All right. So in the Gemara comments, no, that wasn't true, right? Actually, he did keep Torah from Israel, but that dream was shown to him to ease his mind so he wouldn't feel bad, right? Somehow it's very important, right? And this is really an interesting topic of conversation today, right? If someone behaves badly, right, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is it important that he feels bad about it? And I don't have an answer, right? I don't have an answer, but there does tend to be kind of I think these days kind of a cultural assumption that if someone doesn't feel bad, right, then they can't make proper amends, right? Here, right, the tradition seems to be saying, like, we don't want Rabban Gamliel to feel bad about this. Yeah, go ahead, Fran.
Because of the position that he held, tell him what he wants to hear, because we still have respect for the position that he once held. Is that
Right? It could be. I don't know the answer, but it is really right. So that's one reason, right? What might be some other reasons we don't want Rabban Gamliel to feel bad? I'm sorry.
what good would it do?
Right. What good would it do?
I've got a question.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, what was life like in that period of history? It seems to me that studying was a profession. What
So yeah, that's a really
what was beyond that? What was with that to make life complete?
right. So very interesting question, Joe. You're raising something very, very important, right? Which this story is going to get to very soon, right? Yes, you're right that Rabban Gamliel's job was to be the boss and to sit in the Beit Midrash all the time, in the study hall, right? But the other rabbis weren't necessarily so lucky, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was very rich, so he didn't have to worry about working, right? But other rabbis had professions, right? Other rabbis were not able to just be scholars, right? And so that may or may not impinge on what Fran is talking about. I mean, the for me, the reason that comes to mind why we might not want Rabban Gamliel to feel bad, right, is that no matter what his actual position in the Beit Midrash, whether he's the boss or he's not the boss, right, that he's a very powerful rabbi. And as we discussed last week, right, the rabbis in the Talmud are often sort of given quasi-magical powers. And so if he feels bad, right, he might get angry and lash out at the other rabbis, right? And we see that happens in other rabbinic stories, right? And again, I don't know that we would want to take those magical abilities literally, right? Or to take that, basically to sort of recognize that this man has an unbelievably strong personality, right? And has the capacity to do tremendous damage, right? We have someone like that in our society today, right? Who, by force of his personality and other people's cowardice, right, is doing tremendous damage to our society, right? He has no magical powers, but sometimes it feels like he does, right? Because of what the way he is able to wreak havoc on our institutions. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the current relationship, historically or otherwise, of the Beth Din to the involvement or non-involvement of this kind of study?
Well, these are sort of different. The Batei Din is a little bit of a different. It's a different institution than the Beit Midrash, right?
Okay.
I mean, there certainly would be. There would be. So Beit Din is a rabbinic court, right? So when someone came with a practical question,
Did they have Beth Din?
yeah, oh yeah.
So they had a Beth Din, but they didn't bring in. This was a dialogue between.
Well, we discussed this last week, actually, right? We discussed, right, that no one is allowed to be convicted without the testimony of two witnesses, right? And Rabbi Yehoshua was sort of, Rabban Gamliel sort of convicted him in a certain way, right? Without a Beit Din, right, and B, based on the testimony of only one witness. So Rabban Gamliel is not entirely playing by the rules here, right? So anyway, so let's. Oh yeah, and Connie, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If he feels so badly and and sorry for himself, then he's not going to be able to lead in a constructive and positive manner. 100%,
Connie. 100%, and I think that this sort of question about leadership, again, the questions you are all asking are so great because you're sort of either you've read this story before and you know where it's going, or the story is or you're just picking up, right, very sensitively on what's going on in the story, right? That this is also a story. This is also a story, as Joe said, right, about how do people live in the context of being rabbis. And it's also about Connie's question, what is the nature of rabbinic leadership, right? What if you have a leader who, that God forbid he feels bad, he might do something terrible? What kind of a leader is that? Right? Do we really want that kind of a leader in our institutions? Right? So you're anticipating the Talmud. You're like way ahead of the Talmud here. All right. So it was taught. There's a tradition that the tractate Eduyot was taught that day. Right? So an entire tractate, right, was managed in one day. Whoa, fast, super fast, right? Or a really long day, right? One of the. And everywhere in the Mishnah or in a Berakhot that they say on that day, right, it's referring to that day. Right? This is one of these great rabbinic tricks, right? That anytime you see in the Mishnah, right, or in some other extra Mishnaic source, on that day, it's talking about this day, right? So everything that happened on this, everything that says this day, it happened on that particular day, right? Which makes, again, the day is very, very long, right? So there was no halacha, there was no legal ruling, whose ruling was pending in the study hall that they did not explain, right? They got through the entire docket. Right? After that day, they could go on like a 2-month vacation because there was nothing else to do. Right? And they arrived at a practical halakhic conclusion. And even Rabban Gamliel, right, did not avoid the study hall for even one moment. Right? And of course, the tradition is because they didn't make him feel bad, so he didn't hold any grudges. So now we have another explanation why we couldn't, God forbid, Rabban Gamliel would feel bad, right? He would hold a grudge and he would leave, and then his voice would be missing from the Beit Midrash. And what would that mean? Right? It would mean that the discussion couldn't really be complete, right? If a sage of his status was not involved in the conversation. All right. And now this is one of my favorite pieces of this story, and this is probably where we'll end today. So as we learned in a Mishnah, on that day, Yehuda, the Ammonite convert, came before the students in the study hall, and he said to them, "What is my legal status in terms of entering into the congregation of Israel?" Right, it says here, the tradition has it that he wanted to get married to a Jewish woman, right? You know, very common reason, right? Why people convert, because they want to marry someone Jewish. Right? That's why I converted to Judaism. So it's very, very common, right? And what's my status? So again, we have moved now not just from leadership, right, and communal norms, right, and who gets to enter the Beit Midrash, but who gets to be a Jew, right? What is our feeling about converts? And very interesting, right, that he's called Yehuda, Yehuda Ger Emoni, right? He is the Ger is the word for convert, right, a stranger, right? The process of conversion in Hebrew is called gerut, right? Of becoming a stranger, right? It's kind of interesting, right? So they are already calling him a convert, right? But ger can be convert, right? It can also just be a resident alien. All right. So Rabban Gamliel said to him, "You are forbidden." We could have predicted, right? We could have predicted. You know, he doesn't have a Jewish mother. Forget it. He can't become Jewish. Rabban Gamliel said to him, "You are forbidden to enter into the congregation. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Yehoshua, right, who all the time in the last daf, right, was refusing to engage Rabban Gamliel in a halachic conversation, right? Now he says, no, you are permitted, right? So he engages in this conversation. He engages in the argument, right? It could be, right, because Rabban Gamliel is no longer the Nasi, so he feels comfortable arguing with him. It could be that this is a topic that really matters to Rabbi Yehoshua, right? Whereas the matter of obligatory versus optional wasn't something that really was so super important to him that he wanted to get into a big fight over. But this one, Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Yehoshua, but wasn't it already stated, an Ammonite and a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of Hashem, even to the 10th generation shall none of them enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Right, now why is that? Right, very interesting, right, that in the Torah, right, it says that the Moabites and the Ammonites, were particular enemies of Israel, right, and treated them badly in the wanderings in the desert, and so they were accursed from that time on. Yeah, go ahead, Jeannie.
But Ruth or Naomi was
right. Moabite, right. So Ruth is a Moabite, right? And not only is Ruth a Moabite, Ruth is also the ancestor of David, right? She's the one who's, the mother of David's grandfather or great whatever it is, right? So clearly the tradition has some different feelings about this. But Rabban Gamliel, right, is citing Torah, right? And Ruth is in the writings, so maybe Rabban Gamliel is a little bit on stronger ground. But notice, right, he doesn't talk to Yehoshua or Yehuda, the Ger anymore, right? He talks to Rabbi Yehoshua, right? How can you permit him to enter the congregation when he's an Ammonite? That's his last name, right? His last name is Ammonite convert, right?
Doesn't this go to the general principle of who's included and who's excluded?
It does, but let's get there. All right. How can you permit him to enter the congregation? Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabban Gamliel, do Ammon and Moab reside in their place? Is the Moab and Ammon that we have today the same as the one we had back in the day? Right? Sennacherib already came, and through his policy of population transfer, right? The Soviet Union didn't make this up, right? Moving Russians to all of the various places in the Soviet Union and pulling people from the other places into various places in Moscow, right? This is something that has long-standing policy of tyrants, right? Through his policy of population transfer, scrambled all the nations and settled other nations in place of Ammon. Consequently, the current residents of Ammon and Moab are not ethnic Ammonites and Moabites. As it is stated in reference to Sennacherib, I have removed the boundaries of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and have brought down as one mighty the inhabitants. Right? So that basically, in Isaiah already it's acknowledged that Moab and Ammon are, as they were constituted in the Torah, are no longer. Right? And the people who live there now are not the same ethnic Ammonites that God was prescribing. Right? And although it is conceivable that this particular convert is an ethnic Ammonite, nevertheless, there is no need to get concerned due to the halakhic principle. This is the one that Maury has already stated. Right? Anything that parts from the group parts from the majority. Right? And the assumption is that he is from the majority of nations whose members are permitted to enter the congregation. Does that make sense to people? Is that clear? It's a little bit, there's a little bit of Talmudic reasoning here that's not always super clear. But basically, we have to assume that he's not one of the few ethnic Ammonites that remain from the Torah times, right, we have to assume that he's from the majority, right, of people who are from other countries. Okay.
It doesn't make sense,
Why not?
because he says anything that parts from a group, parts from a majority, and then he says he's from the majority of nations, which presumably is a different majority, whose members are permitted.
No. So what he's saying is that the majority of people in current Ammon, right, are people who are not ethnic Ammonites. They are different ethnicities from different countries, different nations that were sent there by Sennacherib. And so if someone comes from present-day Ammon, right, the assumption that we make as Talmudic scholars is that that person came from the majority of the Ammonites who are no longer Ammonites. That's why it's a little bit...
They parted from their own...
Right, they parted not from the small group of original residents of Ammon. He came from the larger group of people that were not ethnic Ammonites. Go ahead, Jeannie.
That seems to imply that there's a tendency to want to move on and not hold grudges against people, you said?
Well, there's that, right? I think you're absolutely right, and I think that also, and which is right now that's a Talmudic notion. I think you're exactly right, which is very different than what we see in the Torah, right? Where the God in the Torah is very often going to be mad at people for generations and generations and generations, and forget it, you'll never get over it, right? Already by the time of Isaiah, right? That is different.
But this is not even, I mean, to contradict myself.
Yeah.
This is about allowing someone to enter the congregation.
Yes.
Just not carrying a grudge.
Right. But that's a big. But the reason why I mean, there probably the actual reason, right, that we didn't want Moabites and Ammonites to enter the congregation, right, is that because like the people that are closest to you are the ones that you want to have the strongest distinction from, right? So they were very close to the Israelites, so we didn't want to they're too close, we don't push those people away, right? But and this is sort of part of the reality of that we have today, right? Is that the chances that the Jews, I mean, certainly there are Jews today, right, who descend from biblical Jews, right? But the vast majority of us are mixed up, right, from all different ethnicities, right? It just is the way it works. Yeah, go ahead, Ann. You want to say something?
Well, I was going to say, if you put everybody in the pot and mix them up, then you're not sure. So you can take the Gamaliel approach, like the Rabbi of Israel. Everybody has to go through an Orthodox conversion.
Yeah.
And the Russians too, he's made some of them go through conversions.
Right.
So.
Well, but at least, I mean, whatever you think of the Rabbanut in Israel, right? There is still it's still the principle is that conversion is possible, right? Where there are people who believe that conversion is impossible, right? Go ahead, Ray.
Well, I tend to think that there was demonstrated goodness on the part of the individual, and this is a basic assumption of a choice of principle, kindness, all the attributes that we inherit in terms of our sources that were demonstrated by individuals or persons that allowed them to come forward and say, rightfully, I want this part of my heritage.
Yeah.
I want this part of my being.
Right. Well,
There's instances in the Bible where they have joined together in different occasions and shown that they were more in keeping on the good side that you would want to say it that way.
Yeah, I mean, right, and and this is always a very interesting conversation, right? Because I end up interacting with people on a regular basis who have discovered, right, that actually they have a Jewish ancestor, right, and very often they do want to claim that aspect of their identity. It happens, obviously it happens a lot with conversos, right? It happened a lot in the Soviet Union. It happens in Lebanon, right? It's very interesting how it's, there's a real pull in certain generations and in certain families to deny the Jewish part of your identity and to enter the dominant group, right? And so yeah. But anyway, yeah. Go ahead, Jeannie, and then Connie. I do want to finish this before we end.
Well, just that, yes, many of us, most of us don't go back to biblical times, but the genetic testing, many of us will show, be 99% Ashkenazi Jewish.
Right.
We go back a certain.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. But there is sort of question of like to what degree does that mass of Jews in Eastern Europe, to what degree does that ethnicity go back to biblical times? I that's above my pay grade. So yeah. So Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Yehoshua, but wasn't it already stated? But afterward I will bring back the captivity of the children of Ammon, says the Lord, and they have already returned to their land. Therefore he is an ethnic Ammonite, and he may not convert. So God has brought them back, right? And Rabbi Yehoshua says to Rabban Gamliel, that is no proof. Wasn't it already stated in another prophecy? And I will turn the captivity of my people Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat of the fruit of them, and yet they have not returned. This is in the time of Roman domination, right? The vast majority of Jews are not in the land of Israel, right? They're in the diaspora, right? Or at that point, we might call it exile, right? In rendering the ruling, only proven facts may be taken into consideration, and they, right? Another interesting use of the word they, immediately permitted him to enter the congregation and convert. All right, and so, which I find to be really fascinating, right? That the only gloss, right, on this very, very important story is that proves that Rabban Gamliel was there. Like, that's all you're going to say? Like, not like what an amazing story this is, right? See, my perspective on it, right, is that Rabban Gamliel even Rabban Gamliel, right, could be included in this day, right? That Rabbi Yehoshua's argument is so powerful, right, that even Rabban Gamliel has to acknowledge, and there's no delay, right, that he is immediately brought into the congregation. Right? And it is really important to recognize that in Talmudic times, right, conversion to Judaism was more like conversion to Christianity or conversion to Islam today, right? It didn't involve years, with the Rabbanut in Israel, right? It's years of study, right? Even for a non-Orthodox conversion, right? It's there's a whole process of learning and discernment and this, that, and the other thing before you go to the mikveh, right? Back then it was like, oh, I'm Jewish, I want to be Jewish, and that was basically it, right? But yes, so the Rabban Gamliel right here is, I would say, right, Rabban Gamliel is defeated, right? So it's I would say that his sort of very, very limited, right, and very controlled gate, both into Judaism as a whole and into Torah study, right, is basically rejected here, right? That yes, there will be people who are not appropriate who come into the congregation. There will be rabbis, unfortunately, I know a few of them, right, who really shouldn't be rabbis, right? But that is a price worth paying, right, for all of the other people who come in that might not otherwise have been given access. All right, so the story continues. So we will next week, I believe that Rabbi Rachel is going to be teaching. If not, then we will finish this story next week, and you don't want to miss the next part because it's more Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua, and it gets to Connie's it gets to Connie's question about communal leadership, right? And so if we do learn with Rabbi Rachel next week, then we will do this the following Wednesday. Okay? All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes, Joe.
I think it's quite stunning that lay people like us take the time or want to take the time to delve into the stories and agree, disagree.
Yep.
I think it's very good. And
It's a wonderful way to spend our time, I think. So
yes, and I hope your hearing situation is perfect.
thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. I'll see you soon, Joe. Give Florence a kiss for me, okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Sounds good.
Let's leave the dogs lie.
Yeah, wherever they are, I'm going to leave them.
one lying right
There's
there.
one there. Right. There's one that's always near me, and then the other one's he's not lying anymore. But he's always hiding.
Did you see Chris Campbell's movie?
I'm sorry?
Chris Campbell. His original name was Chris Campbell.
Oh, I don't know.
Like the Campbell
Yeah,
clan.
Campbell soup. Yeah.
Campbell soup. He's part of that clan.
Okay.
He converted to Judaism. And they made a movie out of it.
Oh, really?
He said, next time, you gotta hear it.
That's funny. Thank you, Stella. See you soon. Bye-bye, Stella. So nice to have you. I'll see you soon, okay? Be well. Yeah, that's great.
Get it in here.
Yeah, that sounds like you should tell Laura about it. She does. Thank you, Eddie. What, sorry, is it? Yeah, I'd like to.
Hi, I'm Jeannie. All right. I'm Ellen. That's my sister's name. Ellen.
Elian. Mezuzah.
Mezuzah. Great. So I'm gonna come up now and do it?
Can you?
Yeah, I just need to,
Are you gonna bless her or something?
yeah.
See, I put up my own listers in New York, and right after I did it, I got bed bugs.
Oh,
I didn't do it, I didn't
you
do
must
it
not
right.
have done the blessing
I screwed
correctly.
it up. See? The word you were looking for when you found uniformity.
Yeah. Conform, yes, right. That is right. Although I'm not sure that I meant uniform. I think I meant uniformity. I really do.
Oh, really?
I do think I meant uniformity in the sense that no, you can't go. In the sense that there's sort of a, because conformity implies that people might not actually agree, but they do it anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas I think uniformity implies that people all kind of agree in sort of a uniform way
Okay.
on stuff. So I think that's what I had in mind. Although, I mean, I do think that the line between those, right? You can even argue, right, that Rabbi Yehoshua was conforming in the first part of the story, where he was not arguing his right. He was conforming, and that was making Rabban Gamliel upset, right? But there was uniformity in regards to Yehuda, the Ammonite convert, right? Because everyone agreed that he should enter into the congregation. So yeah, that's really an interesting
I
question.
really didn't agree with what you're saying.
Right. Well, you didn't have another look at it, and it might it's one of those things that bears repeated reading.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was thinking of looking it up for you myself.
Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.
Welcome back.
Thank you. And you can also look on YouTube. The last week's and this week's are up on YouTube, so you can check it out and get the background. Yeah. No, you weren't. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, talk to you soon, Pete.
Do you know, by the way, that was excellent.
Thank you.
I have a lot to think about, and I know that I've already done this last year.
I don't think we ever did it.
Well,
We started this